So let me just officially welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Women in Leadership Talk. And Vanessa Vakharia, I'm thrilled to have you. I've been so excited to have you on here. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're
And thanks for
welcome.
everyone for showing up. Hi, Valerie.
Yes, you get to see some familiar faces. And so we're thrilled to have you here, Vanessa. And I want to take just a moment and thank our sponsor. Our sponsor for today's event is Benchmark Corporation. And, Luke Villeneuve, some of you on here may know him. He's the president of Benchmark Corporation and is a huge ally to women. And his company has sponsored this podcast today. And let me just give you a little insight into Benchmark. Benchmark is a software solutions provider focused on open source technology to optimize your operations, boost productivity, and support scalable growth. Their solutions assist, accelerate, and automate your business infrastructure and transform your applications with reduced acquisition and integration cost. So we love Luke, and we're so grateful to him for sponsoring this conversation today. And now let me officially introduce Vanessa Vakharia. So Vanessa is the founder and the director of the Math Guru, a super cool boutique. We were just talking about this, where they tutor in science and math. And they're located in Toronto. She's also the author of the Math Hacks, and it's a new book that totally makes math fun. Okay, I'm intrigued by that because math was always tough for me. It's stress-free and relatable for young kids and the parents. And she's also the host of Math Therapy, a podcast that works through the guest's math trauma. She has her bachelor's of commerce teaching degree and master's of math education. She appears regularly on national television and news outlets as an expert in math education, and she speaks globally at conferences about reinventing media representations of women in STEM. Her goals are to be Lady Gaga, famous, and totally change math culture so that STEM is finally as cool and accessible as basically every single Taylor Swift song. Love that. And love your goals. She failed grade 11 math twice, which was the best thing that ever happened to her. And a side note, but completely relevant, Vanessa is the founding member of Toronto indie rock band Goodnight Sunrise. Mindy Kaling is her idol, and Vanessa believes that she should be yours too. So we have so much to talk about, Vanessa.
Me
I'm so
too.
excited. First of all, just your interest, let's dive into, math and failing grade 11 twice. Let's just start there and then get into, how you continue to have this creative pathway of multiple and diverse interests in your life.
Sure. Yes. Okay, wait. What's the first question? There was so many things you just said.
So tell me about failing grade math 11 and how
Oh,
that was
yeah, yeah.
the biggest opportunity.
Oh my God, it was the best. Okay, so I actually went to a fairly academic school when I was in high school, and the vibe of that school, I would say, was if you're not getting an A, like we don't need to pay attention to you. So, yeah, I mean, all I can really say is I failed grade 11 math twice. I was never super panicked about it because everyone in my life, aside from my parents, we're sort of like, yeah, it makes sense that you're failing math. You're not a math person. Like you're this creative, artsy person. And I, wanting to marry Keanu Reeves and become a rock star, which are still my goals, I was like, yeah, that's totally it. I'm just not a math person. And it wasn't until I barely passed grade 11 finally in summer school with a 57. And then my parents sent me to a amazing independent school called SOLA, RIP. It's no longer there, and this school was just a vibe. Like there were only 100 kids in the whole school. There were no cliques, there were no jocks, there were no artsy people or math people. We called teachers by their first names. And I walked into my math class and said to my math teacher, you're going to have a lot of trouble with me. I'm not a math person. And she looked at me and was like, sorry. And I was like, oh, I'm not a math person. And she just said these life-changing words to me, which were basically, that's not a thing. And everything changed for me. And again, it's not that I like suddenly understood everything, but from that moment on, knowing there was someone who believed in me, knowing there was no such thing as a math person, every time I came up with to an obstacle in math, I didn't give up, right? I had that different mindset around it. And I ended up with a 98 in grade 12 math. And that kind of was I know I really am saying that to show off to everyone, but it's not about the mark. It's about the fact that my whole relationship with math changed, and it made me realize not just that I could do math, but that if I could do math, if I could do this thing I always was taught that I couldn't do, what else could I do in life? And that really was a turning point for me. And that's, yeah, we'll get into this later, but to me, it's not about math. It's not about math at all. It's about the power of math as a gateway to a life full of possibility.
Absolutely. So you said so many amazing comments there. I mean, the mindset and the mentor, like this teacher that all of
Yes.
a sudden was like, wow, I believe in you. Like what a difference that, that made in your pathway. So what were those messages, Vanessa, that you were telling yourself when you failed twice? Like,
Yeah, I think the discourse that we very much see today, which is that there are only certain types of people who can do math. I mean, that was definitely more prevalent back then. Like the term STEM wasn't even invented. It's pretty crazy to think that is like a new term. Um, we just have always had this conception, and we get a lot of that through media messaging, that there are types of people who can do math and types that can't. And I think kids learn that at a really, really early age. So that whole time I was failing math, the message wasn't, oh, maybe there are different ways for you to learn math and to excel in math. The message was, don't worry about it. It's not your thing. You were born with a different skill set that isn't necessarily compatible to a mathematical skill set. And I think that is like the biggest lie, um, the biggest and most debilitating lie we teach ourselves, our
yeah.
kids. We are taught. Yeah, it's a lie.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And back to the woman who made such an impact on you, like that is so cool because that can be a differentiator in whether you shift your mindset and whether you don't. So, as an example, if a teacher says to you, well, yeah, Vanessa, you're in this academic class, but you're not very good in math, all automatically you're thinking, oh, well, gosh, maybe I'm not very good. And that teacher has no confidence in me, and you were fortunate to have this woman who came into your life and said, of course, like, of course you can be great at this.
Yeah. And she's the coolest. Her name is Eva Kaczynska. We should just name her. I just talked to her yesterday. We're best friends to this day. Like she proofread my latest math book before it went to print. She's the coolest. And I think she's like one of the OG pioneers of women in STEM without knowing it. Like I remember she used to mention things, okay, like not to date myself here, but it was like decades, more than a decade, like decades ago. Like she was already saying, I make a point to wear really feminine clothing when I come to class. Like I make a point to put on makeup to show my students that like women can also do math. I know now that seems kind of like, okay, well, obviously, but back then it was not obvious. And I would say it's still not obvious, according to many people. And she's always just been this very empowering figure who has been like, kind of no nonsense. Of course, everyone can do math. I don't know what you're talking about. And this goes to the power of belief. Like you said, one of the most differentiating factors in a young person's life or even an adult's life is knowing that somebody believes in them unequivocally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that. And so tell us about your ambition to be Lady Gaga. So I
Oh
know
my
you
God.
have a great band.
Well, okay, so I want to be the Lady Gaga of math education and of music, but she is
Yes.
already the Lady Gaga of music, so I'm certainly not trying to steal the spotlight. I mean, that's fine. I think that, like kind of trying not to say too many things at once, but my master's of math education, which I eventually ended up doing after teaching in the classroom, is all about media messaging that kids get that deter them from going into math or believing they're capable of math. So, in short, through even just all of that research that I've done and my experience in the classroom and in a tutoring center and working with thousands of kids, and just my own obsession with celebrity culture and with fame, I really think that one of the key things missing from mathematical discourse is simply representation in mass media, right? It's simply role models that tell kids that yes, you can be as cool as Lady Gaga, you can be creative, you can be fashionable, and you can also do math. So I think when I say I want to be the Lady Gaga of math education, one of the reasons Lady Gaga is so cool is because she has never shed her identity for art. She's always said, you know what, I'm going to make the type of music I want, I'm going to wear what I want, and I'm still going to be a famous artist, even though so many haters back in the day were like, No one dresses like that. No one wants to hear music like that. You've got to conform in order to be famous. And that's kind of my attitude in math education is no, no one needs to conform to the traditional notion of what it means to be a mathematician. Like, no, we don't need to look or act like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. You can be yourself and also do math.
I love that. And I love that how you explain that, because no matter what we're doing, whether it's math or whether it's you want to be the postman master, like it's being authentically who you are and showing up fully with
Yeah.
all of who you are. Like, don't hide that. Like, that's what makes you so amazing. And
Right.
we were talking just before everybody came on this, when we met you, my daughter was in awe. Like, you're like you've got this like rocker look going on, and then you get up on stage and you start talking about being this math guru and how you failed math in grade 11, and she's just like, oh my gosh. So you really validated for her, and I think you're doing this a lot for many women, grown adults, men, and children, the importance of going after your dreams and being fully who you are. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. That's such a compliment.
Well, you deserved it. You did it. Yeah, no, it's great. So I know you have this passion for, really advocating for women in STEM and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so your talents are very broad and diverse. So where does that really come from?
I think so. Yeah. Again, so much of this is just based on my personal experience of not only being told I wasn't a math person in high school, but like as recently as 2 years ago, I remember I was presenting at a STEM conference, and one of the pieces of feedback the organizer got was they thought it was really unacceptable to be having a woman up there with purple hair and a sequin shirt talking about STEM education, and this man felt that he couldn't take me seriously because of how I looked, and so to this day, I think we do such a disservice to like on a micro and macro level. Like if we want to be super selfish, like don't even think about the kids or the people that you're excluding. Think about our society as a whole, our world as a whole. Like let's get really greedy and think about being like, economically viable and powerful and like competition within industry. We're never going to get very far if we keep excluding people that have valuable contributions. So even to that, so that's on a like really selfish like macro level, like we want to be there, whatever, company organizers wanting to be successful, company organizers like CEOs wanting to be successful, or world leaders saying we want to be competitive in industry. Already, not being diverse and inclusive is not doing you a service. But on a more micro level and a smaller level, like thinking about equality and accessibility and allowing everyone, an equal distribution of economic wealth, that can never happen if we say only certain types of people have access to certain types of things. So, saying, for example, someone who looks like me does not belong in STEM and can't have access to those opportunities, I mean, that's messed up, I guess, in the most basic language. So I think that passion comes from being discriminated against myself in a variety of ways. And I'll say this too, like, I know we're talking about STEM now, but where I felt probably the most discrimination in my later life, so like the past 10 years, has been in my music career, right? Like, and being in a rock band, take a second right now to think about how many classic rock bands have women in them or women of color. Like it's almost impossible to think of. And couple that with like ageism in music. It's like, I mean, I feel that on such a daily basis. It's so like they are not as progressive, especially like rock music is not as progressive as STEM right now. So I think because I just personally feel that daily and I see that daily and I feel that, it's something that I constantly strive to fight against, not just for myself, but because there are so many of us that get pushed away from wanting to achieve our dreams and even our dreams of making the world a better place because of such silly stereotypes and standards that were created forever ago. Sorry, that is the most long-winded answer, but
No, that was actually a perfect answer, and also highlighted how these biases or this discrimination happens in so many areas of our life,
yeah.
right? Like, honestly, when you just said that, I was like, wow, I would have never even thought that, right? And that's, I mean, the more we educate and the more we talk about these things, the more it opens people's minds to who's being excluded, right?
Well, absolutely, and, like, it's so funny because now I'm obviously a part of all of these movements, including, like, this podcast that are, all for diversity in STEM, but I think about music, and in 2019, before COVID, we went on a 30-city cross Canada tour, and there were festivals we would play where there would be 15 bands playing, and I was the only woman on stage the entire day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or the
Yeah.
only person of color on stage the entire day. And we weren't even thinking about it until, or no one was thinking about it. No one would even, acknowledge that. Like, for example, you have green rooms where everyone's supposed to be get changed, and there wouldn't be like different rooms or walls or different places, right? Like it's kind of designed for an all male industry. So I think like things like that are interesting. But then on just like literally, I've tutored over, I've seen over 1,000 students come through the Math Guru, and you can just so clearly see how these things play out, right? Like how you start seeing how those bigger stereotypes trickle down into the classroom to the point where like a 15-year-old boy, for example, is too embarrassed to ask for help because guys are supposed to stereotypically, traditionally, inherently be intelligent. They're not supposed to get help. And you have teenage girls who are getting 90s in math who still think they need to ask for help because they're not inherently smart because they need help. Like there's so it's so insidious. It happens in so many ways. And I've also seen the power of talking about it. So being on my Instagram account and having these conversations and talking to students makes a very real difference in their day-to-day lives and what they choose to do in the classroom. So I think it's a combination of seeing the detriment, but also seeing the powerful effect it can have to actively be working against these stereotypes.
Yeah, no, that's so accurate. And by the way, I love your Instagram account.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
always I'm always sending my daughter. I'm like, look at what Vanessa posted. She's like, mother, because I know I have a child that she's not into social media. I know that's kind of
Oh,
a,
lucky you.
I know it's kind of bizarre. And so I'm the one on, and I'm like flipping her stuff constantly, going, look at what Vanessa's saying about this. We need to show this to your math teacher. So thank you for that. But so that's, I think what you just brought up, Vanessa, is hugely important. And so how do we start to shift that perspective? Like, and it starts young. You're absolutely right. Like, and this impacts lots of areas, not just STEM, to your point. It's the biases we create at a very young age. So how do we shift it?
Well, I think that's really important to note. Like, obviously, for me personally, this stuff is about, let's say, STEM and math and music. But I always say this about math, and I said this at the beginning. It's not about math; it's about limiting beliefs that we teach kids to have. So, like at a super young age, like the age of 6, like let's just create a scenario that has happened so many times in phone calls I get from parents where, there's a son and a daughter, and the son is already being taught that her brother is inherently better at math because he just like inherently without any prompting like picked up a Lego when he was like just born or something, and she picked up a doll, and the parent,
Mm.
whatever it is, it's just getting that idea in our heads that there are certain things we cannot do. There are certain places we don't belong, and we will never be able to push out of those. So that's the actual root that we're trying to deal with when it comes on a micro level of teaching our kids. Like, we want to be teaching kids that you can do anything you want. And as soon as we start saying things like, well, like boys are usually better at math, or like, whatever it is, we start eroding their sense of confidence in their dreams. That's number one. But how do we change that? So, number one, I actually think this is such a cheesy response, but it really is all about education and having these conversations. People with access to this education and to these conversations and to different perspectives. That's how minds change. And it's funny, I was just having a conversation with a friend from a small town a couple of weeks ago. It was a conversation about racism, and she had no idea. She was kind of like, I don't know what privilege means. And I don't know, like, I don't understand why reverse racism isn't real, like this kind of stuff. And we were chatting about it. And she was kind of like, I've never heard any of the terms you're saying. She's not on social media. She's from a
Mm.
small town. She's a little bit older. She was just kind of like, I've never heard any of this. Like, And as I'm telling her about it, she's like, no, this is making sense. And I've never thought about it that way. And it was a simple, like 20-minute conversation. Did she 100% understand everything? No, but you could see her mind start to change and be like, oh my God, like, like, oh my God, I only have white friends. Like, you're right. I've actually never heard a person of color tell me about their experience. Like, I actually don't know. So I think it's those conversations, but that means that we have to make sure that those conversations are happening everywhere, not just here on this podcast where we're all probably pretty like-minded. And I think that's the challenge. Like, I even think about this on Instagram, and sometimes I'm like, ugh, like I'm preaching to the choir. Like, how many male followers do I even have on Instagram? Only 20%. So like I need to be talking to men. Like, I need the men that do follow me to be talking to other men. Like, I think that's the tricky part, but it is about that, like, but I also think there's a bigger part, and this is the part that's tricky for a lot of people, which is that, like, especially in industry, there are a lot of, like, what people call quotas now, right? This idea of forced representation that everyone's freaking out about. And I kind of think that so much of it is about visibility and representation. And I'm going to actually use a really ridiculous, but such a good example. Does anyone watch The Bachelor? Like, do you
Yes.
watch The Bachelor or The Bachelor? You do? Okay, okay.
Well, I've seen
Okay.
Bachelorette. Yes.
Have you been watching recently, like in the past year?
Yeah, I just watched the one with Blake because his mom is a friend of mine, actually.
Oh my God, ew, Blake. Wow, red flags everywhere. But whatever, that's not the point. Okay, so I don't know if anyone here watches The Bachelor. Obviously, it's trash TV, but it's very interesting. So, The Bachelor is like the whitest franchise, right? Like, they've never had yeah, okay, Valerie, I'll tell you why, because this is just fascinating. So, the whitest franchise, they've never had a black bachelor or bachelorette. Like, it's been 20 years. And because, when Black Lives Matter happened, and Chris Harrison, who's the host, he made like a horribly racist comment. He got booted off of the show. Everyone was like yelling at The Bachelor, and they were kind of like, we need to figure this out. Like, you guys have to have a black bachelor yet. We all knew they were doing it performatively, but it didn't matter because the season was, they didn't just have a black bachelor. They made a point to have conversations aired about, like there was a conversation last week with Michelle, who's the black bachelorette. She is amazing. She's talking to like one of the contestants, I get, and they're talking about how they experienced the George Floyd situation. They're having a
Mhm.
real conversation about this. And you might think, okay, this is like what's going on here? Like, this is so performative. But the actual effect of it is they have millions of viewers who have never had a relationship with a person of color who are watching it, and we're getting them where they are. And
Yeah.
they're seeing this show they love and like, I think that stuff makes such a big difference. It might start off performatively, it might seem kind of forced. We might all be kind of annoyed, but it is about representation. It's about people seeing that and having access to it. So I actually think, as you guys know, I started this by saying I'm obsessed with popular media and media messaging because I think that's where so many people get their quote unquote education for the podcast
100%.
listeners. Yeah. So that, and even in companies, like, yes, it is important to make sure we hire diverse workforces, especially at higher up positions. Like, all of that stuff needs to be done now, because it is a long game of people starting to see, like, visibly see that, there are people of all different backgrounds, genders, whatever it is, in every single position. Like, it's about normalizing it. It's about seeing it. It's about giving people access to those conversations that might not have access to those people or conversations in their own communities.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's such an important piece of how we start to shift perspective because it's normalizing, right? And it's humanizing. It's humanizing the
Exactly.
conversations and getting people to recognize. And I remember not this past summer, but summer before last, a young lady that's in our Will Empowered community. She happens to be a Black Jewish woman. She is just,
Mhm.
she's just beautiful inside and outside. And I had said to her, it was right after George Floyd was killed. And I said to her, would you come on our social and have a conversation? And she said to me, this was so like, so powerful, Vanessa, because she looked at me and she said, who are your friends? And I said, what? And she goes, who are your friends? And I said, okay, I have lots of friends. I don't know if I understand what you're asking me. And then she said, she goes, I want to know who you surround yourself with. And when she said that, Like I
Mm,
did a really like a step back and I went, okay, I get it. And I have a very diverse, eclectic group of friends. And then I started looking at my children. Do they have
right.
a diverse group of friends? Because to your point, like we don't always, it's easy to look outward. It's, are we looking inward? And so
Right.
she was super impactful. She said, I just want to know I'm not your only Black Jewish friend. And I go, well, you might be my only Black Jewish friend, but I
Right.
have a lot of Black friends, right? But that is how we start. We start to shift because you're seeing that it's normal, right? Like we're not putting people into um, categories. And it's the same with the math that you were describing earlier, right? Like girls are not good at math, boys are good at math.
Yes.
And that's not true either, right? But it's the stereotype of what
It's a
happens.
stereotype. Yeah, and I even say that to like a lot of my male friends. I'm like, how many women do you hang out with? Like, especially when we talk about like, I know this is a bit off topic, but when we talk about the experience of women or feeling unsafe or anything like that, like I'm like, how many women have you actually spoken to? Like, do you actually have conversations with about this? And they start realizing, like, not many. I actually don't know how women feel when they walk home at night. Like, I've never even asked a woman in my life that. I don't even know what my mom feels like. So, anyway, so yes, those things are super important. And it's important to recognize that not everyone has access to that in their immediate community, depending where you're from. And we've got to provide those opportunities.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's a key point, and we could go on and on about that too. And I love how this is how this conversation is framing because it's bringing up a lot of different perspectives and how you can start to step back and look at your own life and what are you doing? What are your
What are
friends,
you
the people
doing?
you hang out with? What is everybody doing? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I will say the final thing I'll add is if anyone from Bachelor Nation is listening, we're still waiting for our Indian Bachelor. So
Yes.
I'll just throw that out there.
Well done. I'll make sure that gets to the right person.
I have applied twice, so I'm still
Have you?
waiting.
Oh my God, you'd be amazing.
Oh my God. I'd need to be the main one, though. I can't compete with a bunch of people. I'd have to be like the Bachelorette.
Well, let's work on that.
Great. Okay.
Awesome. Well, you would be phenomenal. So I did see a post that you had done, and I loved it because you had talked about just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it's not true.
Right.
And I think that kind of ties into what you were describing, a minute ago about the awareness. But what are you seeing? Like, is that normal? Like most people are, they think it's somebody else's problem, it's somebody else's thing, and
Yeah.
they just don't want to get involved in it.
I would say yes. And I also think, I mean, like, this is no surprise to anyone. Like, I think the the pandemic has opened the floodgates of how we gauge whether something is true or not, and I think that's just the issue. Like, it's like we we are no longer in the days of like, if it's in the newspaper, it's true. We're in the days of like, everyone has different ideas of what research means. So, for example, I like honestly am still so mad about this thing that happened that I have to now talk about it all the time. But I remember when I was in Costa Rica like 3 years ago, I had this conversation with this guy from the States. And he insisted the gender wage gap was not true because he was like, well, at my company, I know that women get paid the same amount. And I was like, okay, that's so great for you. But, like I have a master's in math education where this was my research. And he was like, well, I know like my mom and sister, they don't get paid different than their coworkers. And that was his research. It was his company and his mother and his sister. And he insisted, like, there can't be one because I know, like, there isn't one. I've never seen one. It made me so mad. I'm still so mad about it because, after the fact, you think about all the rebuttals, all the things you could have said. But I think we really do have that idea of like, anecdotal evidence is what it's called. Like if it's, my evidence from what I've seen must be accurate for everyone, right? And that's how stereotypes are formed. That's how stereotypes prevail, all of that. So I do find that that's a big thing that happens a lot. And then couple that with the fact that you can literally research anything and have it confirmed by someone somewhere or some YouTube video. I think we're just in a bit of a state. So like, I think that's where it does help to have access to, like you said, like more humanized personal conversations and to experts It's a tough one. I think it's actually getting a lot harder and easier at the same time. On the one hand, we have access to more information. Like you can follow some Instagram accounts from people you normally wouldn't interact with in your own community. You can get different perspectives. But on the other hand, you can confirm whatever belief you want on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Well, and sometimes too, I think it's a little bit of a cop out that people, they just bury their head in the sand and
Well,
they
yes.
they just don't want to have to, well, it's not impacting my sister or my mom, to your point, and so therefore it can't be true. And so that's just a reason for me not to have to look at it and or do something about it.
Well,
Right.
I think what's really interesting here, and this is like the strategy I'm trying to imply more, but you've got to like be like not, you've got to try and not be so mad when you do it, is to try to explain to people why all of these issues are all of our issues. So, for example, when I talk about the patriarchy and like men don't want to hear about it because why should they care? I try to explain how like the patriarchy isn't good for them either. You know, like part of the values of a patriarchal structure are competition. It's violence, men against men violence, right? Like it is you not ever being able to talk about your feelings because you're a guy. Like you this is tough because you kind of need to do it on an individual level to be like what matters to you. I promise you this is affecting you. You know, like if women everywhere are scared, I promise that as a man that is affecting your life and you should be personally invested in the problem. So I think we have to really try to do that with everything. And that's why I kind of started this by being like, okay, on a greedy level, when we talk about inclusion in STEM, maybe you actually really don't care about who's included or excluded. But if you're the CEO of a company, you want to make money, right? You're going to make more money if you have more diverse opinions coming up with your next product. You know, so like you kind of have to find a way to show people that every issue is everyone's issue in some one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's so true too, because when you can trace it, like what's the actual end result or the
Yeah.
ripple effect on it, when you can trace that and show somebody, that's when the curiosity kicks in and they go, oh, didn't think of it that way. Right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, who's the end users? Are you talking to those end
Yeah.
users? Are you, like look how our environment has changed demographically, right? I mean, there's more, just take women as an example. There are more of us now than there's ever been, right? And so how we keep educating on this and getting through to people, and there'll be some who just refuse to be part of it, but there's also a lot of really good men who are listening and paying attention, and promoting more women. Luke is a great example of that from Benchmark,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah, and for sure, it's not to say, but I think there's a couple of things like not everyone is an empathetic person, and a lot of people don't actually care about anyone but themselves. Now, that's not to say the majority of people, or I'm not even throwing at any stat, but I think recognizing that and being able to capitalize that on a bit and being like, all right, what is it that you do care about? Um, I also think with when it comes to these issues, we have to realize that people are often scared that if they help manage the issue, they're going to take away from their own personal power. So we see that a lot with racism and sexism. Oh, well, if we start letting women have a seat at the table, I might lose my seat. Right?
yeah,
We actually see that with women against other women. We are taught
yeah,
all the time that there's only room for a few of us, so we start competing with each other. So I think, again, it's really important to have those conversations of, um, that's not what's happening. There's not a limited amount of seat. It's not that only one woman can sit at the table. And to also, I don't even know how to specifically deal with that when it comes to people who are already in power being scared of losing their power. But I think it's something to be aware of. Like
yeah.
that is part of the fear. So how can we mitigate that a
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. That's part of why I started my business, right?
bit?
Women in
Hmm.
Leadership Empowered. And that's why I do what I do because, I was that executive. I was like the only female in the room for
Okay.
so many years. And one of the things that I did was I tried to find other women to lift them up and bring
Right.
them into the executive ranks, right? But I saw that happening. Like I had a couple of executives that worked for me that, they were terrified that their really good people might be able to take their job. And part of my coaching was always, you want them to take your job because that promotes you to something else and it shows how what
Right.
you're contributing. But what you just shared there is so important, that we are lifting each other up, and there is more than enough for all of us if you can just open your mind up to seeing that, shifting that perspective from scarcity
Yeah.
to abundance.
Oh my God. I can't believe you just said that. I was about to be like, abundance mindset. And I was like, is that too extra? But I'm so glad you just said that. Exactly. I've been doing a lot of work around abundance mindset. I know it's a super trendy thing right now, but to take the cliches out of it, for real, on a much deeper spiritual level, even like
Yeah.
there is enough for all of us, right? It really is. And also, like, abundance begets abundance. So, like, holding back and hoarding and whatever is not great for you, because what are you doing with all of that? And it's not great for anyone else. So, you really do have to think a bit about that. And I know it's a weird concept for people to grasp, thinking, but why wouldn't saving every one of my pennies make me the richest person in the world? But like, it won't, and it's boring.
Well, I think if you can have some small examples and small wins from doing that, like even just shifting the energy. So I'll be honest, like I was coaching my daughter last night about her math class because she's struggling. And I said to her, like, let's talk about the attitude you have when you walk in the classroom,
Right.
right? Like, are you angry at this teacher because you're not grasping the concept of it? Are you coming across with this energy that repels, versus go in, humanize, have a conversation with him,
Yeah.
make it a, how are you? And he just had a new baby. How's your baby? And get to know him as a person, so that the two of you can connect in a different way and create an energy that is positive around the two of you, versus this repelling energy. And when you do that, you can start to shift how you approach people.
100%. I totally believe that. I feel like we could do a whole other episode on just like energy and the exchange. I got you. I feel that. And I would say too, like, it's just a vibe. It's not that you don't have to believe in anything in specific to know that your energy affects someone else, right? If you smile at someone on the street, they're likely to smile. If you frown at someone or yell at them, they're likely to like all of a sudden feel bad. So, yes.
100%. Awesome. Beautiful. Wow. What great. And you're right. We could have a whole nother episode
Yeah.
on that piece of it. So any parting words before I open it up for the audience, but any like sage advice that you would want to share, so that they can take this away and start to implement some things themselves, so that, you're not the Lone Ranger out there. You got a lot of people doing good work.
It's always hard to come up with like one piece of advice, but I would say that I really believe in the power of these little conversations and interactions. So whether you're talking to someone at the grocery store or with a relative or with a friend, we'll probably all leave here today. Like, I know I already am, like, thinking something new or like a little thought. And I've seen it firsthand with kids and teenagers when I talk to them about the media. I always find that asking questions instead of lecturing is the best way to open up a convo. So I often say to teenagers, if you say something like, wow, there's a lot of sexism in math, they're kind of like, what? But if you say to them, I have a question. Have you ever seen a movie where like the cheerleader character is good at math? And they can be like, not really. And then I'm like, isn't that weird that like the smart person, the smart girl who knows math always needs like a makeover to be cool, and get them like feeling like they thought about it on their own. That's a great way to have some of these conversations with people who might not agree with you. So even where we're talking about diversity and inclusion, to actually not be marching in there giving someone a lecture, which I actually love doing, but I need to stop. But instead saying things like, it's so weird how there's like, I can't think of like m more than one woman of color in like rock music. Do you think it's because people of color are just like, don't like rock and roll? And to get them being like, well, that's weird, right? Like, that can't, why would it be then? And to start leading into it that way, I find that that's actually really helpful. Makes people feel empowered instead of ashamed for not having thought of it. And I'm actually giving you this advice because I need to give myself this advice right now. So thank you for that.
Well, I love it. It's a great point. And opening up that curiosity, because you're right. Nobody likes to be told what they should be
Yeah.
doing or not doing. And so it is very empowering when you believe that it's, yeah, wow, Yeah, I've never noticed that. But you also put them on a mission to go look for examples, right?
Go look for examples. Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, like I've had people say, like, well, there's just not that many women in rock music because men just gravitate towards it more. And you stop and be like, really? Does that seem weird to you? Right.
Yeah.
So, like, again, you'll have people who think that, but I think the conversation can really put the other person in the seat of, like you said, curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'd like to open it up with our audience and see if anyone
Yay.
has any questions. So, ladies, if you want to turn on your, ladies or gentlemen, I can't tell who else on here. If you want to turn on your videos and turn off the mute button, you can certainly jump in here and ask Vanessa any questions. She had some great, great comments. So, who would like to speak up? We have any takers? Everybody's gonna be shy. Valerie, all right. Way to go, Valerie.
Yay. What's up? Thank you guys all so much
Yay.
for listening to me talk for like 40 minutes also.
Oh gosh, I could listen to you talk for longer than 40 minutes, Vanessa. You are
So
crazy. And can I just say, you were the only person, my daughter, my older daughter, was going through this math thing, and I was feeling like, oh my God, if she doesn't take this certain math, she's going to be a failure in life. And I don't even understand all these U levels and M
yes.
levels and all. I had no idea. She was my first kid. And you sat with me and you just explained it all. Like it just all made sense. It was
That's
just,
really nice.
so thank you for that. And your gurus continue to help my daughter Priya. One thing I've noticed too that just actually recently happened to Priya was she wants to go into sciences. She's very determined, which is wonderful. I do catch her referring to herself as not smart enough, or I don't get math, all those things you were saying, Vanessa. But what really broke my heart was a teacher actually said, you're only a 70 student. It was in math. Sorry, I have something in my throat. It was in math, but she said, you're a 70 student. So you can't afford to be talking in class, or you can't afford not to raise your hand. And I just broke my heart. But the positive thing of this story was, of course, mom swoops in and, do you want me to talk to your teacher? I'm going to tell her a thing or two, mama bear, right? Sorry, I have to get my throat. So mama bear wants to swoop in, but you know what she said to me, which was so amazing? She goes, no, mama, I've decided I'm not going to talk to her. And I thought, oh my God, you have to stand up for yourself. And she goes, I'm going to prove it to her.
Awesome.
And I just thought, oh my God, oh my God, like that's so powerful. So I guess when I don't really have a question, but it's like, how can we also enable our kids to stand up when limiting beliefs aren't coming necessarily from media and social media and shows we're watching, but they're actually coming from people who are supposed to be role models in the school system. How can we change that? How do we deal with it when it comes?
This is so good. This is so good. What a moment. Vicky, do you want to say something?
No, go ahead. I'm actually curious what you're going to say on this because I'm dealing with the same thing with my kid.
Well, okay. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because the truth is, sadly, that is like so common. I just had a conversation with one of our students about this last week. It was happening to her. And that's okay. There's a few things. So, Valerie, thank you so much. You're amazing. Love you, love you, love you. Happy to chat anytime, by the way. So a few things. Number one, that sucks. The teacher shouldn't be saying stuff like that. Again, it goes back to putting people in boxes, like based on what also, like you can't just say to someone they're a 70 student. That's not a thing. We've made that up. You literally made up that box. Thank you so much. Second of all, there's a few things, right? Like I think I'm like, oh, like I want to stand up to somebody and I wanted this and that. And we're all, I'm sure, trying to learn when that's a waste of your energy and when it's not, right? So, like, is it really going to benefit us to stand up to a teacher and say, you know what, that was really rude? You know what, it actually might benefit you. But if this teacher is totally unreasonable, it might just make you more pissed off. So, I think the real harm, like there's only two things that really matter in this situation. Number one, if the teacher is going to be so close-minded that they're always going to find a reason to give your daughter a 70, or two, if your daughter believes it, right? Like what we really need to fight is anybody actually internalizing that and believing it, because it comes in all sorts of things. You're only a 70 student. You belong in applied math. Math really isn't your thing. Any of these things, if we internalize them, that's what actually turns into a limiting belief. And the last thing I'll say is, this is so great. If that's what your daughter is using to motivate her, that's awesome. But I also really pisses me off that once again, women have to prove themselves harder than anyone else and feel that pressure, because for many students, that can translate into real anxiety and poor performance, right? Like feeling like, oh, I've got to prove this teacher right. So all of those things piss me off, I would say. And I think the best thing, I mean, we can do, and that you're probably already doing, is just saying, that's not cool. That person is wrong. Like they made that up. It's just not true. And so that's what I try to do with these conversations too, is like, on a much larger scale, we are already taught that a lot of people are not inherently good at math. Like that's already a thing. So now your daughter's getting, she's just getting that from somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? So finding ways to be like, that's just not true. That's a statement your teacher made up. Like it doesn't mean anything. I think that's the best thing you can do. And like you're doing, allow your daughter to deal with it however she wants. Like maybe it is you talking to a teacher. It sounds in this case she wants to prove them wrong, and also saying to her like, you don't have to prove anything to this schlub, you know, like whatever you can prove it to yourself, but don't worry about what this teacher specifically thinks, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not what it's about. I think all of those things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Is it's true. She doesn't need to prove it to anyone except herself. And I think that's a really good message for me to give to her that I hadn't thought about that. It's just really heartbreaking when people in these power positions, whether it's corporate or whether it's in a school, are bullying people and are almost validating their limiting beliefs, right? They're like, it's like just criticizing everything. And it's whether it's in a work environment saying, oh my God, that presentation sucked. And you don't know what you're doing here. Why? I don't even know why you're working here. To yeah, you're 70 students, so you can't afford to be talking to your friend in class.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like
even
how
no, you're totally right. Like, I mean, again, it's that idea of saying like you're not management material, right? Or you're
yeah.
like you're right. It's all, I like that you kind of brought that up, because that is kind of the point. It's all part of the same thing. Like whether it's in the classroom or it's in, like, it's all part of that same messaging. So,
Yeah.
Well, and it's also moments like this. And Valerie, thank you for bringing that up, because I'm having a similar issue with my daughter. And I was saying this to Vanessa before everybody came on. But even last night, like she got her report card and she has A's in everything. Like she's 90s and above. She's got excellent in all of her characteristics. And math, she got a 62. And and this is what was the clincher for her. She got a S, satisfactory, in initiative and self-regulation. And she was so pissed, like Priya, right? And I said to her, I go, but look at your other marks. Like all your other classes, you have 90 plus, and you've got excellent in all of these other areas. So one teacher saying that you don't know how to self-regulate, or you're not, she goes, what does that even mean?
what
Right?
does that mean? I want to know what it means.
Well, self-regulation is about how you show up, really, right? How you manage and lead yourself. That's a big part of it. And one of the things, so Vanessa, back to what you and I were talking about with the energy, right? I said to her, what's the energy you're walking into that classroom with? Because he may be picking up on this negative vibe that you're putting out to him because you don't like him, or you guys are struggling to work things out, or just he's teaching in a way that doesn't work for you. And so have a conversation, try to figure out how to make that work. But where I was going with this was, goes back to why so many young people walk away from STEM, right? Because they're told they're not good at sciences, or they're
Yeah.
not good at math. And so then we're all like, wondering why we have so few women in STEM, and we're brilliant at it.
Well, and it's also like, these are more obvious ones, but it's also like, especially in a classroom or as a parent or in a corporate setting, being so aware of every little thing you do that might implicitly be telling someone that they're not good at something, right? So, yes,
Yeah.
saying you're only a 70 student is an obvious one. But for example, let's say you're a teacher and you only ever pick boys to answer questions. Like you're doing it subconsciously. Or like I remember when I was doing my master's, I read this really interesting study about how when in a grade 6 classroom, the teachers were looking at kids' notes, they would say to girls, "Your notes are so pretty and organized." And then they would say to boys, "That's really great problem solving." And girls would just get this idea that, like, oh, my function is to take pretty notes. Like, that's what I'm best at. So, like, we have to be very aware again of these subtle things. And that comes from being educated and having these conversations about, like, like actually, Valerie, like, it's so interesting. Like, I don't know who this teacher is, but I would love to talk to them and be like, hey, just so you know, when you said that, it actually made my daughter feel like there was nothing she could do in her power to ever get above a 70. Is that what you meant? Like,
Yeah.
and that teacher might say, no, I just mean that, she can't be chatting in class because she's at a 70 right now. Like maybe they spoke. Maybe they meant, well, no, if she does her homework and does this and that, she could get an 80. And you could say, that's not what it sounded like. Like, I need you to tell her
Mhm.
that. So,
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Really great.
Yeah.
Anybody
And
else?
P.S. she did
Oh,
get
sorry.
80s.
Yay, Priya. That's awesome. Great example, Valerie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have a question for Vanessa before we wrap up here today? Tanya?
I'm very curious, Vanessa. Hello. And I think it goes to some of the conversations that we'll probably have in the future. But to this point of having that conversation with that math teacher or any STEM educators, you obviously are extremely vocal. You're in the press, you're everywhere. How much FaceTime do you actually get with the educators, and how many do you think are actually listening? Because I know that some people don't like to take the criticism, or they're being told, like you said, and getting a lecture about it. But are people getting you to come into the schools and speak to the STEM professionals and is it becoming more and more of a thing, or do you still feel that there's resistance? Because I would love to try and see how we could all amplify this to get you in front of more and more educators, not maybe just in Canada, but beyond that. So I just want to know, is it working? Do you see resistance, and how we can go about that?
well, that's so nice of you. Thank you. And I will actually, I think I have some hopeful news. So I would say for sure, like last year, I did more talks than ever before. And I find that people are like really engaged. Like even on Instagram, like I've built my following so much and they're all teachers. Like it's all these math teachers. Honestly, most of them are actually from the States. They have a much more, first of all, they have more people, but also I think education there is like it's quite different. Like they're in like a way worse situation than us almost. Hard to believe, I know. But there's more funding for it in the States. So there's like a whole mix of things. But I guess my point is I would say that I meet with teachers all the time who are really passionate about this. Like they're really into it. They'll sign up for 4 of my talks at a conference. They really want to make a difference. They're very well versed on math anxiety. They're really into it. So I actually think, but I will say this, every time they see me talk, they're like, we haven't had anything like this. Like no one's even brought this up before. We've only had an hour on professional development on how to even use emotional learning strategies. So I often get people reaching out to me saying something like, again, this is so specific to Canada, but the Ontario government 2 years ago was like, we're now doing socio-emotional learning. That means, we're going to be actually dealing with anxiety and stuff, but never train teachers on it. So we'll get teachers being like, we really want to do it, but we don't know how. So I would say yes. I would say, honestly, there will always be those teachers who don't care. There will be those teachers that just want to phone it in. But I actually think, like, for the most part, teachers really want to make a difference. That's why they went into it. And this kind of circles back to tapping into people's needs. Thinking about Valerie here, for example, let's say this teacher was like a very, like, oh, whatever, I say what I say. And you sat down with them to say, Priya really respects your opinion. Like she really respects what you think. And I think like if you tell her this, if you told her this, it would make a difference in her life. Sometimes teachers need a little tap in. Like let's be honest, teachers don't get treated well. right? For the most part, by our systems, right? So like, I think sometimes it's easy. We can all think of that job we had where eventually we were just like, oh, like we just want to come home at the end of the night. So I think if you can help tap into the fact that you became a teacher probably because you wanted to change a life and you're about to change a life and you have a the chance here, you have the sliver of opportunity to completely change my daughter's life. I think most teachers are very like into that.
Awesome. Awesome.
I'm really glad to hear it because my mom is a teacher and she has been for her whole life. She teaches English and geography, and she used to be a principal as well. And she's very much into this idea of how can I change things? How can I help?
Yes.
And
Nice.
and I'd love for you two to connect because I
Yes,
think
connect
that
me.
well, and that's in Portugal. So hopefully we can get that going so that you can help those teachers as well. Just recognize, because I feel that they're obviously trying to do their best, but I don't think that they are advanced in the way of thinking, of being so
Totally.
much more open-minded and questioning these different things or being aware of these different, you know, bits of language or whatever,
Yeah.
that they might need a little bit more support. So I'll
So
get you in
let's go to
touch.
Portugal. What I'm hearing is let's go to Portugal. Okay, cool.
She's ready to travel. Awesome. Wow. What a great conversation today, Vanessa. And thank you. And for everybody that's listening, please follow Vanessa. Like, you know, her
I think you're all
Instagram, as
following
I
me.
said, is awesome. So, and also share. And if you have teacher friends, like share this podcast with them so that they can hear some of these comments. Like, really not just teachers, like honestly, like to Vanessa's point, we need more men like focused on, you know, how they can help and make a difference too. So please do share the podcast and get her message out. Vanessa, you know, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Like you are a rock star in our eyes. So yeah, seriously, you're so natural and you're so well spoken and you have such a great heart for wanting to make a difference. And I love your direct and candidness. So that is so appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me. And I cannot believe I took advantage of the opportunity to swear. I didn't swear once.
You didn't. You even said mess instead of something else earlier.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, yes. Follow me. My things are at the Math Guru. My band is Goodnight Sunrise in case you want to check us out. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'd just like to take a moment and thank our sponsor again for, you know, for hosting or for sponsoring this podcast today. So Benchmark, they pride themselves on customer first solutions, and they deliver top quality service, innovative solutions customized for their customers' needs. They focus on many verticals that include, but are not limited to, communications, public sector, healthcare, commercial, retail, consulting, management, tech, and manufacturing. Their website, if you want to learn more about Benchmark, is www.benchmarkcorp.com. So thank you to Benchmark. Thank you to Luke for sponsoring the conversation today. And December 2nd, if you ladies can join us, that would be awesome. We have Jennifer Reischer. She's the author of We Need to Talk. It's a memoir about wealth. And it will dig into many aspects of our belief systems as well. So hopefully you can join us. That's at 11 to 12 on December the 2nd. And so Vanessa, I'm just going to send you off here with the biggest hug virtually. And thank you for all the wonderful conversation today. And I'm going to make Zoe sit down and listen to this podcast later tonight. So we will get her, you know, thinking even more so about working with you.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Bye.